My name is
well.
Jake Fife, as the board can say. I'm 19 years old. I'm the co-founder of Fife Paranormal, along with my dad, Chris Fife. Fortunately, he can't be here today. But today I'm going to be talking about some of my experiences of a paranormal investigator, according to the stupid board. But it's actually experiences of a paranormal investigator. I've been doing this about 10 years. I started out with my dad's cassette recorder, you know, the old tape decks where you had to load the cassette into it, attach the microphone. And that's what I started out with in 2010. But my biggest heroes were Ed and Lorraine Warren. Everything the Warrens did, I read about it, I read their books, watched all their interviews. Anytime they're on television, I made sure to stay up and watch it. So the paranormal has always been a part of my life. And I had many experiences when I was young dealing with, shadow figures. I would hear voices, see things, but when you're young, you have other priorities. So it wasn't until about 2010 I decided to become a full-time investigator. So after a little while, going to cemeteries, doing sessions with voice recorder, I actually still use that voice recorder to this day. My dad, for my 14th birthday, January 9th, took me to the Stanton Train Depot in Stanton, Virginia. Now, as you can tell by the bullet points, I've made 5 return trips since then. 3 deaths are said to be responsible for the haunts, but what's really cool about this location, Stanton, Virginia, the town was founded in 1740 by a guy, if I remember right, John Lewis was his name, an explorer. There's a story not backed up by historical records, it's just hearsay. There used to be this witch. I'm trying to remember, there's this little community called Beverly Manor. There's a middle school there. Thankfully, I avoided that school. But she was also said to have moved in that area about 10 years after John did. And she was said to be a very, very powerful witch. And her and John Lewis did not get along at all. In fact, the town I live in, she built a few of the houses, had them built. And she was tried a few times for illegal activities. But the weird thing was, no matter how much evidence the attorneys could present to prove her guilt, she always got off scot-free. And people always assumed it was witchcraft. That's one of the main reasons she was known as a witch. So that's also why some people believe out of all the places in Augusta County, he chose Stanton, Virginia to settle, is because, the witch, a lot of times with witches during that time, they'd be attracted to certain areas due to certain energies. They believe that certain energies pull people to certain areas, whether it's good or bad or even ugly. And some people think John Lewis stayed away from there because there was bad energy, and that's what drew the witch in. So Stanton, about the time of the 1870s, 1880s, had the highest murder rate in the entire world. Over Chicago, over London, Paris, New York, all these places, it was the worst. One of the reasons for this was you had so many bars in this 1.5-mile radius. And typically, angry young men and alcohol doesn't really go well together. So the railroad was put in 1855. It was key for that area because Stanton was somewhat of a small town up until 1855. It was kind of the center of Augusta County, which Augusta County at that time stretched all the way towards Rockridge, Rockingham, that kind of area. I'm probably getting a few of those names mixed up, that's all right. So when the railroad came through, Stanton went from this to this. And it brought all sorts of new industries in. You had not just these little mom and pop shops, you had bars come in. You had the theater came in. And so the railroad was extremely important. Now, come time of the Civil War, the railroad was important because it was the first stop outside of Richmond. And it also had a line that connected directly to Washington, D.C. So after the Battle of Bull Run, when the Confederate Army was moving a lot of troops from the south up to the north, they were doing it through Stanton. So throughout the entire war, this railroad depot was the site of many Union attacks. And it was actually destroyed by Union General David Hunter in 1864 for the very first time. And when it was destroyed, there are some claims that there were some arguments that broke out. Some people were shot up along through here, but once again, it's hearsay. The first big death occurs here in 1861. It's this man named D.C. McClurry. Now, he's from Arkansas. He's about 19 years old, and as soon as the war breaks out, he's pumped. He, is all about the Southern cause, Southern independence. And some of his friends from school joined the Confederate Army. They joined, if I remember right, it was the 7th Arkansas Regiment, and so he goes with them. They go up to Stanton, and the way it worked Confederate Army is you would come into Stanton, you get one night to live it up, basically, because after this, you're going to be going through hell, basically. So his night of fun ended pretty early because he went to a bar that actually still stands to this day. He had a few too many, got in an argument, decided to walk it off. He decided to walk it off at these train tracks. So in his drunken state, he's walking around, probably stumbling like this, can't hear, probably talking to himself. And trains used to come from this way, going this way, but now they come from that way. He didn't see the train coming, and it hit him head on. And instantly after that, a few years, they would report a Confederate soldier. Even about 1863 was the first report of seeing a Confederate soldier greet other soldiers up on the tracks. Now, the second death that occurred up here was this man named William McMeacham. Now, he's a very interesting case if you know the history of Stanton. Is anyone here familiar with the eugenics movement of Virginia in the 1920s? Dr. DeJarnette, some of the sanatoriums. Well, McMeacham had fought in every major battle of the American Civil War. And then after the war, he went out to Colorado, and he was huge in the mining business. He's very rich. Well, while he was out there, he had an affair. And his wife somehow in West Virginia found out about it through probably, 19th century social media. Don't know how that works. But she took the kids and ran away to southern West Virginia. And so he went crazy, literally, and he was instituted into Western State, which at the time was about 40-some-odd years old, 50-some-odd years old. And they had a new doctor by the name of Dr. Joseph DeJarnette. Now, DeJarnette was supposed to be this new up-and-coming doctor. He was trying new methods. He was supposed to be the guy that was going to change everything at Western State. And so William McMeacham was put under the care of Dr. Joseph DeJarnette. Now, McMeacham wasn't crazy. He just had moments. One moment he'd be telling Dr. DeJarnette about the Battle of Gettysburg, talking about his commanders, every little detail, stuff we as Civil War historians would love. And then the next moment he'd be telling you about him and God taking walks in the garden, and he'd be dead serious. So Western State, something they did at the time was, it was kind of like it was a 24-hour grace period. If a patient was deemed sane enough by 19th century standards, they could go out into downtown Stanton, and if they could survive 24 hours without getting killed, causing problems, or anything like that, mainly they wanted them to find a job, find some people that could back up their sanity credibility. I don't think that's a term, but we'll use that one. And if you could pass the 24-hour test, you were free to go. No problems. So William McMeacham was granted his 24 hours. At this point, he was about 60-some-odd years old. He was deaf partially. He had issues seeing. And for some reason, he decided to take a stroll on these tracks, as a lot of soldiers do. And kind of like your good friend D.C. McClurry, he, kissed a train, putting it lightly. And apparently it affected DeJarnette so much he actually didn't have patience for 2 more months because he was reeling from that. Now, the third death is the most tragic one. It's of this girl by the name of Myrtle Knox. She ran away from home in Kansas City, Missouri, and she joined this Oscarlette troupe. Now, what's really interesting about the Oscarlette troupe is Stanton had never had opera come to it before. And Stanton they were starting to really get into the arts. They were trying to be a very progressive community. And so you had, they were actually the first theater in the whole county to have a talkie movie theater. So anything that was seen as progressive in the eyes of society, Stanton was all on top of it. And so when the Oscarlettes became popular in the late 1800s, actually 1890, they instantly invited them. And so in between their shows in Raleigh, North Carolina, in Washington, D.C., they made a stop in Stanton. Now, they were supposed to be there on April 27th at 12 o'clock. Actually, 11:30 is when their train was supposed to come in. It was a late train. So the whole town, because they were excited and they probably had nothing better to do, they're all lined up on this wharf. They estimated about 200 to 300 people were lined up here. Banners, they had torches, they had lights, they had cameras, they had everything waiting for this troop to come in. So 11:30, no train. 1 o'clock, no train. People are starting to get a little worried. By the time, late trains, it wasn't uncommon. So it gets to about 2:30 in the morning on April 28th, 1890. And they see a light coming from a distance. Now, the way trains used to come through here, I don't have a photo to show you this, unfortunately, but there is a very long, straight stretch that goes about, I would say about 250 yards, and then it goes around another bend near this copse of trees. So they notice on the copse of trees, they see this illumination, this light. So they're like, okay, that's the front light of the train. Well, it turns out it wasn't the front light of the train. The entire train was on fire. about 2 miles out, there's a hill. And as the train was going down the hill, the conductor lost control of the brakes. And there was an explosion, and the whole train, the engine car and the coal car, caught fire. So you have this runaway train that's coming through here, and actually where I took this photo, not terribly long ago, is close to where the train derailed. It's coming through, and somewhere along these tracks, it flipped up. But the weird thing was the locomotive, the engine, all that stuff, it continued to go around, and it was only the last 2 cars derailed. Not seriously, the car before the last one derailed up onto here, but kept going, and actually took out some of these posts. But the last car, which was a sleeper car, which had the Oscar-lettes, it flipped completely on its side and leaned up against here and actually ejected some of the passengers that were sleeping, Oscar-lettes, out onto the platform. So the whole town's freaking out. And the train's still going. It actually went about 200 yards down the track before it finally stopped. And they're going through the damage. Some people have broken limbs, some people are, traumatized, but nothing too serious. Until they get to this rubble. Somewhere in this area is my estimate based upon newspaper accounts, where they find this Myrtle Knox. And she's bleeding out because she has a spike going through her thigh. And the problem with that was, at the time, aside from that's kind of not good, Stanton didn't have a hospital in town, which is kind of crazy to think. They had little clinics, and they figured, we can just live with these mom and pop clinics for a while, nothing crazy is going to happen. Well, something crazy happened. And Myrtle Knox actually bled to death on the platform because they didn't know where to take her. Everywhere was closed, everyone was up here. So they found a King's Daughter necklace around her neck, and they actually started the King's Daughter Hospital in her honor, which is still functioning today. But Myrtle Knox, out of all the spirits, is said to be the most active. I've had many encounters with what I believe is Myrtle Knox. My dad has, my mom has. But the main reason we went out to this location is because it's a great location for training. And that's pretty much what it was the first few times we went there. We went there January 9th, 2014, which it was about 33 degrees outside. It was freezing cold. One of the dumbest investigations I've ever done because, we almost became a ghost that night. But my dad showed me how to conduct EVP sessions in an investigation type setting because, if you've ever been on an investigation, it's very different when you're just at a cemetery walking around. Is anyone here? What's your name? And then when you're actually in a location, you're set down, you have your equipment set up, you've got your perimeters, you've got everyone gathered around. There's a big difference. And so the investigator I am today is because of this depot. And also whenever we get new equipment, still this day, I always take it here. Not just because it's tradition, but because it is one of those locations. Every time I've been there, I've always gotten something interesting. Like when we got the Rodaway diode, which is based off an invention by this guy named Constantine Rodaway. It uses a germanium diode, and it's tuned to a specific frequency that cannot record human voices. And so it's really cool because, if you get a voice over the Rodaway diode, you don't know what it is because it can't tune into radio frequencies, and it's not tuned into human frequencies. Unfortunately, in the year and a half I've had it, I've never recorded anything aside from weird taps, which is weird because the only way you can make a tapping sound on the Rodaway diode is if you tap on the germanium. And every place I've used it has been almost like a kids type area. I used it in the kids room at the Nickerson Sneed House, which I'll talk about a little later. Used it in the children's ward at St. Albans. So my theory is that they see this cool little triangle with the cool little stone in the middle, they're tapping it. But Stanton Train Depot, it's always going to hold a special place in my heart because that's where it began. In my investigation style, I am a healthy skeptic, kind of like if you heard Donald Molnar's lecture, he's a very healthy skeptic. That's about the approach I take with it. 9 times out of 10, when you experience something strange, there is a logical explanation for it. It's always good to establish intelligent communication before asking location-specific questions. Now this is something my dad, he's been an investigator since the mid-80s. You can go to locations and ask, is anyone here? And get a great response, and it's cool because it is intelligent. But for me, the meatier evidence types is when you're at a battlefield and you ask, did you die here? And something says yes. Or you ask, who's your commanding officer? And it gives you an accurate answer. Those are location-specific questions that only the spirits of people that were in that physical environment or present at a certain event, they can vouch for. And so I think whenever you get an EVP or a spirit box voice that kind of backs it up like that, it adds a bit more credibility to your experiences. And then I was taught, I would consider this more of an old school way. A lot of people consider it empathic or clairvoyant or some type of psychic abilities, but pay more attention to what my body's telling me than what equipment is telling me. Because, my dad, when he was investigating in the mid-'80s, they didn't have all this fancy equipment that we do now. And kind of like me, he went out with a flashlight, a quick camera, and a tape recorder. So, he didn't have these fancy K2 meters that light up, whenever something's near. He didn't have the motion detectors until a little later. So he learned early on that your body is tuned. You do have a sixth sense. I believe everyone does. It's just some people, they choose to acknowledge it, some people don't. So that's something that the first few years investigating, still to this day, I still try to learn, when my body's telling me something's present. So now we're going to talk about some of my investigations. The first big one I ever did was Pocahontas Cemetery in Pocahontas, Virginia, not terribly far from here. It was founded in 1884 after a mine disaster claimed the lives of 114 men that are actually buried in a mass pit. And still to this day, I think I have an idea of where it is, but I can't say for certain. It is one of the largest cemeteries in the area. Casualties from other mine disasters are buried here, and these spirits are very active. A lot of people believe, especially for the 1884 mine disaster, that because their graves are forgotten, that these spirits are more apt to talk. And that is a theory about the paranormal. It's, I don't remember the exact term, but a lot of people call it the forgotten soul. And that's, a spirit that's grave has either been disturbed or destroyed, desecrated, that it'll be more likely to talk to try and get its story told. My dad investigated here in the 90s, and I investigated the cemetery for the first time in 2015, and it was really cool for me because, when I was 10 years old learning how to become a paranormal investigator, he would tell me, oh, when I investigated this cemetery, I had this happen, and this is what I did, this is how I approached that situation. And this was one location he visited a good bit. He told me a lot. He actually had some of his cassettes left. And so I got to listen to his investigation from 20 plus years prior. Not to make him sound old. Anyway, so to be able to hear those recordings of him when he's starting out and then when I started out to go here, it was one of the coolest things for me. Now this cemetery is deceptive, as a lot of cemeteries are. If you look at the picture, it's very bright, very colorful. These aren't just broad terms. This stuff does play a part in investigations. You have a cemetery that is open. You have a cemetery that has bright green grass. You have, even though they're dead leaves, it's bright yellows. Think of positive colors. Color psychology is important. It plays a part in the paranormal, not just for the spirits, but also how we perceive activity. So a cemetery like this, I went in with the idea that, okay, it's going to be basic. Might have see a few figures, but it's mainly going to be pretty nice spirits. And then you get towards the darker areas, which, I can already hear a lot of people saying, well, it's because, the trees are up. But there's certain psychological effects that this stuff has on the human mind. And you can either chalk that up to spiritual reasons. Darker entities are more attracted to the shade, darker areas such as this. But the human mind, when you have a bright area like this, and then you go into the darkness, there's a little tick that your brain does, a little switch, to where you feel less safe, you feel less secure, you feel like if you're going to encounter anything, it's going to be more, I don't want to say malevolent, but it's be more negative because it prefers to hide in the shadows instead of in the light. So my first investigation here was actually with my uncle who's working the camera now, and we went up to this part of the cemetery. I had my PSP-7 spirit box and 100 milliseconds, which is the fastest scan rate for it, and it instantly got a few voices. It was really cool. Until you get to about this side, it's actually the second grave up here. It's a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Fudo. He was a World War I soldier. He actually served in the American Expeditionary Force, and he died about 3 months before the war ended in Europe. And some people say that his spirit is very angry. One of the people that actually told me about Nicholas Fudo was Rodney Shortridge when he put this event on. So when I went through here, I went there, being a healthy skeptic. I've heard stories that Nicholas Fudo is kind of an angry spirit. Let's see how Nicholas is, old buddy Nick. Well, it turns out old buddy Nick is a little negative. I have recorded a few growls from here, but when I say growls, it's more of, get out of here type of growls. Because a lot of times when people say, oh, I recorded growls, the mind instantly goes to evil, demonic, simply because of Hollywood and television, mainly Ghost Adventures, how they portray negative experiences. Not every negative thing you record is evil. Another cool thing about the cemetery, it's old and it's gigantic. It's the kind of cemetery that you go in one part and you'll feel a certain way. You'll feel, to go back to what I said earlier, you'll feel open, you'll feel free, you'll feel positive. Then you'll go into another part and you'll feel total fear. You'll feel like there's someone always one step behind you, like you're not alone, and not in a good way. It's a really weird mix. And it was cool for me because, my dad wasn't there. I kind of learned how to deal with that on my own. And it's something, nothing terrible happened, thank God, but, you never get totally comfortable in this cemetery. So St. Albans Sanatorium, I could probably do a whole lecture on St. Albans. I've actually debated that. But I've been to this location 7 times in 2 years. This is the location I have had my scariest experiences at. This is the only location in America that I've been utterly terrified in. Now, as the notes say up there, it was built in 1892 by a guy named George Miles. He was a teacher at Emory and Henry, wanted to start his own school, and so he started the St. Albans Lutheran Boys School. Now, what was innovative for Miles at the time was he had a focus on athletics over academics, because he realized, kind of like people like LSU, Alabama, those universities now, football brings in a lot of money. If you have a good football team, you can bring in a lot of money to watch the games. You can use that money to either boost your pay, or you can build more facilities, such as the second building to this. So the school was a prep school, and his idea was, I don't just want to teach, philosophy. I don't want to teach writing, English, that kind of stuff. I want to prepare people. It was a boys' school. I want to prepare boys for a cutthroat business world. And so that was the mindset he had. And so St. Albans quickly got the reputation as one of the roughest schools, not just in the county, but the state. There's no official record on how many people died in the school, but it's said to be dozens of suicides. There's actually a yearbook article you can find online, and it refers to one of the kids not returning, and they actually talk bad about the kid not returning because the football games had to stop because they used this short kid as a football. And so that's the kind of atmosphere this place had. And they played teams, they played high school teams, they had a rivalry with Virginia Tech. They were fierce rivals. So in 1911, it's kind of weird how the records go, because some people say George Miles died, some people say he just moved away. I have found records that said he moved to Memphis, Tennessee to start another school, and I found records that says he died. It's a little confusing, but St. Albans as a whole is confusing. So in 1915, this guy named Dr. J.C. King, who, if I remember the name of the place, was Southwest Lunatic Asylum. He was one of the doctors there. And he proposed this $8 million expansion. Now, mind you, this is in 1910, $8 million expansion. And his idea was, if we were to treat patients, like they were normal people, they would get better. Because at the time, unfortunately, sanatoriums were not the greatest places for patients. They treated these poor people as though they were subhuman. They saw, these mental defects, and they're like, oh, we can, almost do whatever we want, and they won't care because they're less than human. So his idea was, no, these are people just like us. So he had this idea, he wanted to build a huge facility that had a pool, tennis court, all this stuff. He wanted a working garden. He wanted, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but basically he wanted to get the patients out and working. And his theory was that over time, their brains being outside in the sun and doing stuff, it'll slowly fix itself, which is a very incorrect term nowadays, but in his mind, that's how he worded it. So they said no, they actually laughed him out of his job. And so in 1915, he was going by Radford, and he saw the old boys' school, which had been vacant for about 5 years at this point, 4.5 actually. And he decided he was going to take all of his life savings, and he was going to fix this place up and turn it into his dream hospital. So in 1916, it's actually January of 1916, he admitted the first patients, I believe it was actually 24. So the area, going back a little bit, it saw skirmishes and sieges during the American Civil War, not on the property. That's something, if you go to the website, they say there was Union artillery placed on this ridge. From the journals I've read, the maps I've read, this is incorrect. It's actually half a mile down. There was a skirmish. You can actually still see the columns from where an old railroad bridge was. And there was a running action across the bridge. Union was chasing the Confederates. And according to the Union commander at the time, I can't remember his name, but he reports, and we stationed our batteries above the skirmish site. So, you know, there was no bridge connecting here, but there was the bridge half a mile down the river. So that's where I believe the artillery was. But there was death in this area. The Great Rose Meadow Massacre happened in Blacksburg. So, and there was a strong Native American presence. They would hunt these lands. And so some people believe that some of the connections they had played a part in some of the spirits that are here today. So, 1924, fast forward a little bit, Dr. J.C. King passes away. And his wife takes over. But the problem with that is he's already set up this board. And the board becomes corrupt pretty quickly because the arsenal has just opened up. And they see all the money they can make from these patients coming in. So they actually vote Mrs. King out of her position as owner. And they started bringing in new equipment, such as electroshock, hydrotherapy, hydroshock, all this craziness. Now, during my research, I have not found that they did eugenics, which eugenics is, it's almost evil, what they were doing. They did not do that here, from what I've read, but there's a lot of hidden history to St. Albans Sanatorium. And I've heard numbers of up to about 5,000 to 6,000 people died in this building. So the building's goes on until about 1990, when it was actually sold to Radford University. Now, this little building next to it here, that was Radford University's student hospital. This is where the medical students could come in and basically practice. And something that they would do is they would take some of the patients from here and actually bring them over. People that wanted to get into psychology, people that wanted to work in places like this. And a lot of the students that started here actually moved to St. Albans and worked during its last year of operation. And believe it or not, some of those students still work for St. Albans today. So, 1992, Radford decides to sell it to Carillion. Carillion decides, oh, we're going to do some renovations on it, and then they completely abandon it. Now, St. Albans still exists. It actually has a facility in Blacksburg, and it's still the actual St. Albans, this one right here. But they completely just abandoned this one. They wanted nothing to do with it. They probably used it as a tax write-off. But allegedly, about 1994, 1995 is when it started, satanic rituals were performed inside. Now, some people say that multiple portals were opened directly to hell. I have actually spoken to people who were allegedly part of the group. And they told me that they started out with kind of small stuff. And then they started, progressing their rituals until eventually they got the idea to summon, the devil himself. And allegedly, the ritual worked. I was told the ritual was done in the bowling alley, and it summoned this entity. They don't think it was the devil himself, but it was described as a goat creature. And if you're familiar with St. Albans Sanatorium, one of the common claims of the bowling room and the boiler room is a goat-man entity. Now, the goat-man entity you see a lot in powerful satanic groups. I don't have a picture of it now because I don't like that bad juju, but there's a very popular symbol with serious satanic groups. It's a pentagram, but it's not the typical one. It's got an extra star point down. This is a terrible representation of it, but that's actually called the Call of the Goat Man pentagram. And this place is littered with a few of those. And allegedly that was, when they created that symbol on the wall, that's what summoned the entity, and it came from the back of the bowling alley where the pins were stored. And one of the common claims that a lot of people have is when they're back in that area, and I can attest to this, they will feel a force come out of that wall. And then after that, they said the investigation will change, the energy. My first investigation there, it felt like when you're in a storm and the wind's hitting you and it's crazy, it's constant, it's cold, and it feels wet, it feels moist. That's what it felt like coming out of the back. And some people say that's where the open portal is, and these evil entities, they come out of it. So, as you can see, the last little point there might also be a body buried in a building somewhere. The mysterious death of Gina Renee Hall. She was killed about 1.5 miles away from here. Some people say that the guy that killed her, who was a fellow student, he worked at St. Albans or either knew someone at St. Albans. And some people believe that he buried her body in the building somewhere. Personally, I don't believe that. My personal theory is he threw her in the New River, which doesn't make sense because the body would have washed up, but strange things happen at Radford. But one of the areas I believe if she is in the building would be in this little area right here. This you actually cannot get to. It is a storage room still to this day. I've talked to people that's been by it. It has some of the old original equipment from the 19-teens in there, and it's to the point now to where the roof started to cave in. It's really unsafe to go into, but it really sucks for us investigators because that's allegedly where her body is, inside the wall by the door, which there is a door if you go around that corner. If you've been to St. Albans, you'll know the door I'm talking about. It looks like it's an underground door, so her body has to be somewhere in this area. Now, one of the reasons people think Jenna Renee Hall is buried here is because a lot of people see her spirit that looks just like her in the building, which, you know, you could see it as she died a mile and a half away. For some strange reason, due to the energy of this place, it can be seen as an energy hub and spirits may be drawn to this place. That's the theory I have. A lot of people have a very common theory about churches. Even if you're not religious, churches or places of, I guess, spiritual power or religion, they serve as almost, think of it as like a bus station. You get in here to go to the next place, the next stop. So I believe, even though this isn't religious, I think St. Albans might have that power to it. So some of the things I've experienced at St. Albans, I have had objects thrown at me. This is the second location I had something thrown at me. I actually had a rock thrown at my feet. Voices, phantom sound, shadow figures, that kind of stuff is the norm at this place. It's kind of weird if you don't see a shadow figure there, which is cool because in a lot of locations, you know, you really want to see a shadow. You want to, with your full-on eyes, like you're seeing me now, you know, undeniable proof. And this happens all the time at St. Albans. Demonic entities, unfortunately, this place is littered with them. Typically, for the paranormal, I hate dealing with the negative stuff, which is weird because as many times as I've been here, this is probably the most negative place I've ever investigated in my life. But one of the reasons I keep returning here due to all the negativity, why does a place like this have so much evil and darkness? There are other sanatoriums all over America, and you know, if you want to go over to across the pond, all over the world, there's sanatoriums, there's mental institutions worse than St. Albans, but they don't have the reputation for the evil that St. Albans does. So what I'm still trying to figure out to this day, what attracts them here? And unfortunately, what I found is there is a hierarchy that extends not just to demonic entities, but to elementals. Now, is anyone here familiar with elemental entities? Elemental entities, I would rather deal with a demonic entity than an elemental. Going back to what an elemental is, not to get off on a tangent on it, if you ever hear Native American stories of the spirit of the woods, the spirit of the sun, that's an elemental entity. They're guardians of the earth. They are put here before time. They are as old as, you know, angels, demons, that kind of stuff, but they're in their own little thing. They guard certain areas for certain reasons, or even sometimes certain people for certain reasons. The trick to that is, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Sometimes they're a mix. A bad elemental entity is, I don't want to say far worse than a demonic entity, but it's worse than a demonic entity. So, why an elemental entity? Because I believe this place has at least one or two. Why they would be attracted to St. Albans is beyond me. I'm not familiar of any limestone deposits. There might be some that's in there. That could be a reason. There could be some that happened, you know, during the time of the Native Americans. They could have done a ritual there that wasn't written about. But something here is controlling all the activity. And it's scary because I have run into this force a few times. And it's the most unsettling feeling you will ever have when you're in the presence of something that is truly powerful, that it can manipulate the way people feel. I have seen my dad tear up. My dad never tears up. I saw a room full of 15 strong-willed people reduced to tears because it decided to make its presence known. I have seen terrifying figures. I saw a leather-looking alien creature. I saw a huge blob creature actually in this hallway pictured here. So something has a motive for chasing people off certain areas, for changing people's moods, possessing them. And that's the number one thing paranormal. You know, why are spirits here? What is their purpose? What is their goal? For places like this, that's a bit more serious. You know, why are these entities doing what they're doing? So, skip ahead just a little bit. Cabin on 360 is a great location. It's on a Civil War battlefield. There's some skirmishing, actually some Union pickets were stationed in the woods about 50 yards to the left of this image. There was a rape murder that occurred in the house next door. And some people say because of that rape murder, the negative energy of that action, because I believe murder is anything sadistic, craziness like that, it does attract negative entities. You know, evil's attracted to evil, just like positive is attracted to positive. That allegedly attracted this shape-shifting entity. Some people have called it the lizard man, some people have called it other things. But it's in this building next to it, which, speaking of evil, it was actually a State Farm office. So if you're terrified of insurance, that was a real evil going on there. But they've since moved out. That location's actually open for investigation now. Didn't mean to rhyme that. So we went in here with the basic story. There was a rape murder. Some people believe that spirit of the girl that was killed, you know, her body was actually dumped in a fridge behind this house, and they found her about 3 days later. Some people believe that that bad energy somehow tainted this house too. And so we went in with the idea we might, you know, encounter a negative entity, we might encounter some human spirits, but not too much. This place got intense real fast, as to where there were points where you could feel the house shake. And we actually have it recorded where you can hear the house rumble like an earthquake. This is the only location that's ever happened before. And it is still this day our second most active investigation. Paris Cemetery, last location I'll talk about today. One of the oldest cemeteries in Giles County, Virginia, graves of Civil War soldiers and Revolutionary War captain I'm actually related to. Phantom voice, shadows, feelings of being watched. Rumors say that it was a ritual site of a local satanic group. Some people say the satanic group that actually used this had ties to the Radford group, and the Radford group, they're a scary group. Allegedly, this group summoned a guardian entity to attack people that disturb the cemetery, which my cameraman can actually back me up on this one. This guardian entity is kind of like any other negative spirit. You can feel when it enters your area. You can, you know, we were there, what was it, in the fall 2018, it all of a sudden got real warm. It got real still. There's a highway, I don't remember the name of the highway that goes next to it. The highway, it was almost like the volume was turned down on it. These entities, they will get you in these little boxes. And sometimes they do this divide and conquer type mentality. You know, one person goes over here, they mess with them until they're oppressed. Then they do it to the other person. Sometimes they just go for total fear. Now, this entity is not the kind to possess. This is the kind that it just wants you gone. One of the questions that I ask, because I've heard so many local legends about this place, and one of the problems is there's almost too many local legends. There's not a lot of truth about this place that we can go on record and look at. You can look at the graves, you can get an idea of, you know, what the cemetery might have been used for, but in terms of actual documentation, there's not a lot. So part of my job as a paranormal investigator is separate fact from fiction using the paranormal, the people that are actually there. So I asked, you know, were rituals done here? And I had a voice that told me yes. So as for whether or not rituals were done according to the spirits, yes. But that's the truth is, you never know when a spirit is telling the truth or when a spirit is lying. So next thing I want to talk about real quick is not one of my investigations, but is Spiritcom, because I do experiments aside from just investigation. The biggest experiment I've ever done was based on Spiritcom. If you've never done research into the Spiritcom, I've only got about 3 minutes left. I can't go into it. This is one of the, it's a crime that this isn't a bigger deal in the paranormal. Created in 1979 by George Meek and Bill O'Neill. Going back to the fathers of paranormal, you have Stanley Hergensen, who is known to have recorded the very first EVP in 1957. You have Constantine Rodovay. Were the two big granddaddies of paranormal in terms of EVP research. They believed that if you want to communicate with spirits, you use frequencies. You don't use white noise. But nowadays, you're taught it's white noise, not frequencies. It's kind of weird how that was shifted. But his idea, George Meade, this is actually Bill O'Neill operating the Spiritcom device, you use 13 tone frequencies they are within the human range, because this is a radio. This is a two-way radio. You speak into the microphone. You can hear your voice, but the spirit is supposed to manipulate your voice and the energy of your voice, because they believe, kind of like I believe, everything is made up of energy. And the more energy you present for spirits to use, the likelier they are to communicate with you. So they would use all these contraptions, the tone generators right here, and this was the amplifier. This was actually the receivers. And then they had the speaker set up over here. And you could talk to the spirit, almost like talking on the phone. So they also figured out pretty early on, you could maybe communicate with aliens, because you're dealing with frequencies. A lot of people believe that, since it's the same kind of stuff NASA deals with, the possibilities are endless. And then they got to the idea of interdimensional entities, and they kind of went a little crazy with that. But they made contact with a man by the name of Dr. Mueller. Now, this spirit, mind you, these guys, he's from Pennsylvania, George Meek's from around that area. They started talking to this guy named Dr. Mueller. So they're like, okay, cool spirit, he knows a lot, he's actually helping them out. And they started asking him about his life. And it turns out Dr. Mueller, he said he was a scientist, worked for the United States government. So they started doing some research. It turns out there was a Dr. Mueller that worked in the 60s with the United States Department of Defense. And in his off time, he worked with radios. He worked with music. And they actually tracked down his widow and sent her recordings of the spirit column. And she verified that is her late husband's voice. And he died in 1969, if I remember right. So about 10 years before their experiments took off. Now, they were asked to come to Washington, D.C. to present for the United States government. They were that popular. They saw the potential, almost like Don Molnar was talking about Project Stargate using ESP. They were wondering, could we talk to spirits and they would give us information about, the Russians at the time, or the Chinese. So, allegedly, the demonstration went really well, to the point where they almost bought the spirit column off of them to use as an actual government project. And then, as fate would have it, this gotcha journalist wrote an article, because Bill O'Neill, years and years ago, he was in a mental institution. But he was, cleared of any insanity, anything like that. He actually ended up having a successful kids show, where he did little sketches. But because of that article, the United States government pulled out its funding. And they had a newsletter they would send around the world, and people stopped subscribing to it. Bill O'Neill ended up becoming very depressed because of this. He ended up becoming a bit of a recluse. George Meek, he ended up passing away. He was an older man, and they ended up giving the Spiritcom one of the Mark IVs, the very last one they made in '85, to this girl named Sarah Estep. And she used it with great success until her passing. And believe it or not, the Spiritcom Mark IV, which is the last Spiritcom we have intact, is in an aviation museum in Florida, sitting in the gift shop, which is a very strange place for this to end up, but that's the only one we have. So when I did my experiments, it's very easy to find schematics for this. All the frequencies they use, I created what I call the Fife Com. Now the reason I call it that is because it's not exactly a Spiritcom, but it's close enough. It still uses the frequencies. I have had no success with the spirits over the radio, but because the frequencies generate energy, I have had, I guess to say, more spirit box responses when I had the frequencies running than when the frequencies weren't running. So to kind of summarize my lecture, you never know what idea is going to work. The Spiritcom, the frequencies, I think we really need to pursue that in the field today. These locations, a lot of the stuff I talked about featured, satanic stuff, negative spirits. And that's not because I dwelled on it, but because when I started in the field, no one took me inside and said, there are entities in this field that can hurt you. There's evil out there. In life there's evil people, crap like that. But in the spirit world, you really don't think about it. So I had wished that when I was starting out in the field, someone would have talked to me about that. So when I give these lectures, I usually like to give a bit of a warning to show, there's not just physical danger, there's spiritual danger. So I conclude this. Anyone have any comments, questions, theories? I'm Jake Fife from Fife Paranormal. I'll be hanging around here for a little bit more. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Fife Paranormal and on YouTube at youtube.com/Fife Paranormal. Thank you all.
Thank you.